Welcome to Officially Green.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening from wherever you're joining us from. Thank you and welcome to another Officially Green series where we ask big questions that connect ecology, ethics, and existence. And the big question today is, can life be meaningful without the existence of a higher power or divine purpose? And to help us unpack this question, I am honored to welcome Dr. Whitney Bauman, a distinguished scholar whose work sits at the fascinating intersection of religion, ecology, and philosophy. Dr. Boma is a professor of religious studies at Florida International University and the co-founder of the nonprofit organization Counterpoint, Navigating Knowledge. His work critically examines how our ideas about nature, the sacred, and the secular shape not only how we see the world, but how we act in it. So he's known for asking courageous, paradigm shifting questions, particularly about the complex entanglements between religion, science, and environmental ethics in the face of today's global ecological crisis. A leading thinker in critical post-humanism and geophilosophy, Dr. Bowman challenges us to move beyond conventional barriers and consider new ways of constructing meaning, whether or not those ways involve a divine framework. So today, we'll explore what it means to live ethically and purposefully in a world where the divine might be absent or maybe reimagined. So let's begin. Dr. Bomal, thank you so much for joining us today. Such a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so let's start with the center of today's discussion. In your view, is it possible to live a deeply meaningful life without believing a higher power or divine purpose?
Right. Well, that's not an easy question to start with. But it all depends on sort of what you mean by meaningful and what divine purpose is and this sort of thing. So I think that one needs to be situated in something larger than just oneself to avoid egoistic traps and this sort of thing. And of course, people have done this in many different ways in many different places and times throughout human history, as we know it. And some people tend to have a more eminent understanding of the divine, so that God is in nature, the pantheistic view of the world, and then others have this sort of more transcendent monotheistic view. And I think that I would argue that, for me, I basically don't know enough to say whether there is or isn't something. So I call my position a viable agnosticism. And what I mean by that is even if we look at the sort of modern scientific cosmology, right, that 13.5 billion years ago, there was a Big Bang. This sort of thing in the universe has been expanding in all directions, and we have 4.5 billion years of geoevolution on the planet, this sort of thing. But we can't see outside of the universe. We can't see what was before, or what if there's an outside, maybe there's a multiverse, right? And likewise with I think with when we interact with each other, I can never know what it is to be you and sort of the way that you experience the world, and you can never know fully what it is to be me, right? So there's this space in between, and rather than fill it with nothing, atheism, or everything, a full-blown theism, I think it's okay to live in this sort of in between space and sort of in a humble way that we can say a lot, but we can't say too much, right? And there's room for a lot of different viewpoints and beliefs and meaning making practices, I think. Mm.
Interesting. So it's a tricky question. But for you, like this is a very silly question, but like what does purpose mean? Let's start with that. What does purpose mean to you? Like when you think about
Right. Yeah, so I don't necessarily believe in a like that there is this huge plan from beginning to end, and the universe is sort of guided into this plan, and that we each are born somehow destined to fulfill part of this plan, right? But I do think that meaning emerges in the process, right? So one of the things I think it means to be human is to be a meaning-making creature. We can't, dolphins swim and birds fly and dogs bark and trees respirate, this sort of thing. But we humans, part of what it means is to make meaning. We can't help it, even if we're an atheist, right? People still make meaning out of their lives because you don't just get up and, it's not just one thing after another, but you kind of put yourself into a context of where you came from, what you're doing now, and sort of what you hope to achieve. and you have desires for the world, and you work together with other people towards common projects and this sort of thing. So I think there are many different purposes, and each one of us finds a purpose given our evolutionary, ecological, and social and cultural contexts, in which we find ourselves, I think.
Yeah, and just going by what you said earlier about viable agnosticism, I don't know if I pronounced that right. I think I find the idea compelling. I find your idea of the space in between,
Hmm.
um, and also like that there are limits to what we can know, both cosmologically and interpersonally, and perhaps meaning lies in how we relate across those gaps. So if meaning arises in a relationship, like you've mentioned, like between people, between humans, and even between the planets, then how
Hmm.
do we activate that sense of connection in a world that often feels, um, for a lack of better word, fragmented? And do you think rituals, stories, or even science itself can help us reach that space and build a more grounded sense of purpose without necessarily invoking a divine authority?
Right. So I think this is one of the things that, I mean, of course, I don't I don't know how to answer that either, but the project that I work on in terms of developing a planetary understanding of ourselves, a planetary citizens, a planetary ethic. And this simply means that we are first more earthlings, creatures amongst other creatures. And even if there is not a sort of certain foundation or certain teleology or point towards which we're going, there are still common grounds for understanding. We all have to breathe oxygen. Um,
Yeah.
we all need water. We all need shelter. The gravity exists, right? So we have these common grounds, and I think the planetary community, both human and non, helps provide us with certain grounds, then from which we can then flourish in many different ways of making meaning. Um, and I think, it's some are animistic, some are theistic, some are agnostic, these sorts of things. Some involve religious traditions as we know them. Others involve practices like hiking or or
Mm.
being in nature, this sort of thing. Maybe reading, right? For many monks and monastic traditions, reading is the spirituality, right? So so I think that given some common grounds, we can also that from there many different ideas and meanings can flourish. In that sense.
Yeah, that's profound. And just going a bit more personal, like how has your own academic or even personal journey shaped your response to the big question of today, which is just a reminder to the audience. The question is it possible to live a deeply meaningful life without believing in a higher power, divine purpose? So how has your own academic or personal journey shaped your response to this question?
Yeah, I mean, of course, we all change over time. I grew up in the state of Arkansas in the United States, in a small town, a farming town, and so I grew up
Oh,
with a family farm, and this was in the '80s, and during the '80s, of course, you had in the United States and the UK, you had deregulation of a lot of things. And so this really hurt small farmers because it led to, for instance, being able to get cheaper rice or soybeans, which both of which my family grew from other places, which meant that these small town farmers would go out of business and the towns dried up and this sort of thing. You saw this happen in the auto industry and in many different places. So that to me was it connected my sense of sort of whatever the divine was tied up in landscape, right? And tied up, I had the spiritual experiences and being out in nature in this place, and then to see it sort of taken over or to see it, that sort of vision destroyed by global economics and politics and, some certain forms of neocolonialism, this sort of thing. It really sort of connected my thinking about religion and nature and with the global in a sense. And so for me, then, I decided to study religious studies and I started with Buddhism because I thought to myself, if one religion can't be right and everybody else be wrong, that just doesn't make any sense to me. There's so many people in the world, but they all have interesting things to offer, and some of them there's some commonalities and then some differences, right? So I think for me, my journey was to agnosticism comes from um, recognizing the damage that religion can do to people, to certain bodies, whether it's promoting sexism, racism, or heterosexism, or this sort of thing, but also to the planet, right? If we think of ourselves as if we think human beings are primarily made in the image of God above everything else, that leads to a certain way of of treating the rest of the natural world versus if we believe that we are kin, we're in kinship with the rest of the planetary community, then there's a different way of interacting with the rest of the natural world. So these are the kinds of things that then sort of began to guide my studies and have ended up making a career out of it as a professor. So yeah.
Yeah. Very good. So someone in the comment in the Q&A asked that how should higher education institutions, so speaking of university, help students explore questions of meaning and purpose, especially in increasingly secular pluralistic society?
Right, this is a great question. So I think one of the things that's happening right now, and I don't know what's to blame. There's lots of factors, but we live at such a fast-paced world, a fossil-fueled world, and information is everywhere. And now we have fake news and alternative facts, and there's a lot of people due to climate change and the old neoliberal globalization of economics and the inequities that creates. It leads to a lot of reactions and negative ones. So like you have nationalistic movements, right? In the US, like let's close the borders and get the people out that we don't want and just take care of ourselves, right? You see this in European countries, you see this in Hindu nationalism, you see this, in many different places around the world, right? I think that response doesn't work. I also think that what universities can do in this situation is to help us to slow down, take a step out of this fossil fuel pace and think together, right, about what alternatives there might be. I think there's no going back to a pre-globalized world, but I think that there are ways in which we can recognize our own connectedness and entanglement in these global flows of energy, information, and materials, even if we sit in the same place. We're intersected every day by information and materials and ideas from around the world. So how can we use that in a way that doesn't disadvantage certain bodies over others, right? How can we figure out how to live in this complex, entangled planetary community in a way that helps all the different types of bodies in the world flourish, so to speak. And I think universities and religious communities too can have a huge role to play, especially where we're seeing less and less time to have these conversations, right? Everybody wants to go in and make their point and then get out, right? It's like, and the person who shouts loudest wins, right? This sort of thing. That's not really a conversation. A conversation is the ability to be converted by another's view, right? So you go into a conversation with the idea that someone might change your mind. We don't really have many spaces like that. At the local, much less the international planetary level, to have these types of conversations like the ones we're having here today. So hopefully.
Yeah, and then I think one thing you said that is so important is that we can't undo globalization, and we can become more conscious of our, I mean, we can become more conscious of our entanglements, especially how our lives are interwoven across the planet through food, climate, etc. And so what I'd like to do is to build on that, because you asked the question is that how do we live in this complex planetary community without continuing to disadvantage certain bodies or communities.
Hmm.
So is what does ethical living look like in this entangled world? And are there values, practices, or stories, maybe from religion, maybe from ecology, that can help guide us towards greater justice and shared flourishing, even across difference?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some guide rails in this process, and it's not so much a specific, thing that everyone should do, but I think it's just some guiding principles, and you can find these in philosophies, in religions, and a lot of different cultural traditions from around the world. And I think I have, well, working on a set of four sort of guidelines for planetary ethics. And so I think it starts with something like compassion, right? The ability to
Yeah.
suffer with compassion, right? So the ability to recognize that we all live at the expense of other life. And so that means that what we do with our lives ought to matter, right? How much suffering does there need to be for one person to live, right?
Mhm.
Certain people born in certain cultures, like in the United States, use up way more resources than one person born in in Mongolia, let's say, for instance. But so the thing is then how do we change that, right? What can we do to help recognize and compassion for others and for others' suffering? And then I think another one is this conversation, right? The ability to be converted. How can we playfully have conversations together to really listen to rather than sort of just talk at one another, so that we can hear from the many different voices and the ways in which current worlds affect their bodies differently, right? We're treated differently based upon the embodiments we have, not just humans and non-humans, but within humans, right? Male, female, black, white, in different cultures, these sorts of things. So how we need to listen to the many voices so that we can hear how what people's experience of these worlds that we live in are. And then I think there's something like companionship, right? So the ability to compan is with bread, right? The ability to share our resources equally, right? And not have such an unequal gap in terms of who gets to consume and who gets stuck with the waste and who gets clean air and who doesn't and these sorts of things, right? So I think this sort of ability to share our common earth, air, fire, and water with other humans and the rest of the natural world, right? We live in the sixth great extinction um, on the planet, right? And it's due to fossil fueled and other types of carbon-based climate change. So how can we then learn to come together and have these conversations? And then I think also creating these spaces, creating spaces of connection and entanglement that help us to develop a sort of planetary public space, right, where we can have these conversations. The late Pope, right, had just wrote in his last big encyclical, which was a return to his Laudato Si environmental encyclical, suggested that one of the big things is that, this neoliberal sort of thing since World War II that's made some people better and made some people worse, is falling apart now. And what comes next, right? We don't really know because we haven't created the type of public political spaces where we can sit together and have these conversations that might lead to ideas about what a better way of doing multilateral international dialogue might be. So something like this.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And just going back to ethics, one of the values that we hold dearly in the officially green movement is our commitment to the planet. And can reverence for life and the environment substitute for traditional religious or? And how do you think that ecological crises are reconfiguring people's sense of purpose?
Yeah, I mean, these are great questions. I mean, I think that I think that this idea, sort of how we recognize that we are a part of something larger, can happen in many ways. I think it can be done through sort of like the greeting of religion, right? So the Forum on Religion and Ecology at Yale University with Mary Evelyn Tucker and John Grimm, they had this whole series of Christianity, ecology, Judaism, ecology, Buddhism, and ecology, so on and so forth, right? And so this is the idea that like religions have ethical commitments and meaning making practices and all these rituals and stuff, and they have good organization, right, of religious communities. So what if we could just sort of highlight the eco ethics within each of the religions? So that's sort of one way of doing it. And then another way, and this doesn't have to be either or, but another way I think is through finding one's connection to the rest of the natural world. That could be through animals, a pet, right? It could be through hiking, it could be through love of a place and farming, it could be through Oh, excuse me. Sorry, the air just blew the window shut. Um, so it could be mountain rock climbing. It could be lots of things. It could be on the ocean, right? A lot of people love the water, right? So I think that there are many different ways to find this sort of what E.O. Wilson called a reconnection to our biophilia, right? Our love for the rest of the natural world. How have we lost this? I start my most of my earth ethics classes, I start with, what comes to mind when you think of nature? And everyone says, trees and whales and the sky and the image of the earth. Hardly anyone ever says me, myself, this computer, the buildings we're in, the urban environment. This is all nature too. How is it that we've written ourselves outside of nature? And how can we write ourselves back in to nature?
Mm. That's very profound because funny enough, like when we started as a green club, that was one of the questions. So just a little bit of backstory. I was teaching my students over some decade ago and in the class, and I asked a very simple question: what does it mean to go green? And they were just like, oh, what's that? That was a long time ago. Obviously, now a lot of people are talking about climate change and things like that. And I was, okay, let's simplify it. When you think about green, what comes to mind? Just the same way you've asked. And the question, everything is, everybody's talking about trees, about nature, about all those positive things, but nobody actually, mentioned like me or myself or.
Right.
So I never really thought about it that, we've actually kind of dissociate ourselves from nature, which we are part of it, right? So I think that kind of resonates with me. Just I'm gonna take you back because there was a question from the audience that says, what do you mean by planetary public spaces? How do they differ from traditional public spaces?
Right. So, I mean, I would say that it's an expansion of what the political philosopher Hannah Arendt called the polis, which is the place of public discourse, right? So that we come together and debate ideas and then walk away to figure out what we might do differently, right? So this sort of thing. So not a space where you just go in and shout the loudest or you have the most money to give to a campaign, right? It's a space of deep listening. And I think the difference with a planetary police or public space is that this would then include also the rest of the natural world, right? So how can scientists represent the voice of dolphin or whale or bacteria or fungi, right? How can we bring the rest of the planetary community into the political sphere so that whatever political decisions and laws and these sorts of things that we're creating don't just tack on nature as a problem to deal with after, right? But it's essential to understanding ourselves and essential to any solutions that we're going to have to climate change and these sorts of things.
Thank you. And another question for you is how do you view ecology, religion in terms of neoliberalism and post-humanism? So that's a question from the audience.
Right. So, neoliberalism, I think, is part of, I would say, is part of a problem. It has some great values, I think. The Declaration on Human Rights comes out of the liberal understanding of the self and this sort of thing. But this, of course, um, the liberal Lockean self is based upon the imago Dei, right? That each human has this soul, right? So it comes from a very Christian influence or monotheistic, at least, influence background. And I think that what it does good, it's that, right? Like everybody should be treated fairly and equally in these sorts of things. However, what it doesn't do very well is it doesn't pay attention to our entanglement and our interconnection, right? And so that it's one thing, for instance, if so for instance, I'll just say it. So Elon Musk is not going to go to jail for the people that are harmed in the making of Teslas or the environment that's ruined in the making of a Tesla. If an
Mhm.
individual, let's say farmer, burned down, one of Monsanto's fields because they were angry and they were desperate and they were trying to make a point, that person would go to jail, right? So this is what I'm saying. So it's like yes, we need human rights, individual human rights, but we have to see ourselves individuals in relation, and primarily that relationality is what leads to our individual selves, right? I mean, I didn't do anything for these opposable thumbs. I didn't do anything for the body I was born into, the language that I was born into, right? I didn't create that. I didn't create math and history and all these things are we join a community that then we find ourselves within, right? And so that's what I think the problem of neoliberalism doesn't address very well.
Okay. So, the question was, I'm not quite sure. It says, as neoliberalism as it ended, do you think it has ended?
I think I think to me it seems like we're experiencing the end of it, and nobody really knows what's next. And by that I mean, right, the the way in which um, there is no sort of again, this is part of the problem of neoliberalism, right? Is that it was a neoliberalism of certain and the globalization of neoliberalism was of certain values, right? And it was primarily the foreign in Europe and the United States that were sort of spreading these technologies as if, they were this sort of center. And then you had China and Russia over there, but there was, we stayed away from each other and this sort of thing and sort of, but so I think that the problems that have arisen from that, from that sort of deal, if you will, I think have become too many to ignore. And on top of that, you're seeing what I was saying is this, which certain people want to return to nationalism. Oh, globalization's scary. Let's return back to. So I think that whatever deal that was struck has been undone. And also it's not all bad, right? I think there are now multiple centers. There always were multiple centers, but now I think there's recognition of there's not one power anymore, but there are multiple powers around the world that need to find some way to work together. It can't just be this unilateral sort of, we get the most money to the UN, so therefore we get the biggest voice in the UN, right? That doesn't, make much sense anymore, and it never did. But I think now we're just beginning to realize it, right? The National Social Forum, I think, does some of this stuff. So then they have a meeting, I don't know, ever so often. I don't remember how long it is, but it's basically a big convention, and it's not socialism as in like Marxism or this sort of thing, but it is trying to look at a a way of doing economics and trade that is fair and just and that pays attention to the real cost of cheap labor or the real cost of polluting rivers when you're making a certain product or the real cost of education and healthcare and the real cost of parenting, right? That is often unpaid work, right? One of
Yeah.
the everybody says, the children are the most important, but then the biggest job in the world is the unpaid work, right? As a parent, right? And so what resources can be
Mhm.
there to help with that, rather than sort of the person who can make the most cheapest product and sell the most with the most profit, right, wins, right? That doesn't really make a lot of sense. So
So I'm good. Just a reminder that the question for today is, can life be meaningful without the existence of a higher power or divine purpose? So I'm going to flip that question. And so if we accept that there is no, just flipping the question, if we accept that there is no divine plan, no cosmic justice, then what stops everything from becoming meaningless or self-centered? What anchors morality, sacrifice, or hope in that kind of worldview?
right. And I'm not sure there is, was, or ever will be something to stop that. I mean, think of all the things that have been done in the name of religion, right, of one or another, that have not always been great things, right, that have often been egoistic and self-centered and this sort of thing. So I think there is no fire, there's nothing that prevents that. And I think what does prevent it is this recognition of our entanglement, of our evolutionary and cultural and biological and histories, right? Our earthliness that connects us together into this sort of web of existence. And I think that, having some sort of grounding in that, I think to me suggests, well, yeah, sure, you could say, yeah, I live in a relational world and I'm going to take it all for myself, right? People can do that. But I think that's where community is important. And I think that's why we need these public spaces to come together, and sort of talk about how certain ways of being in the world are affecting bodies negatively, right? I think it's harder to continue being selfish and or whatever you want to call it, being sort of not caring about how your actions affect the world when the people and things that are in front of you telling you this is how they affect me or they're doing that, right? I think most people do have an innate sense of compassion, right? And in fact, when people don't seem to. In most places, we say there's something wrong with them, right? And just like, if somebody says life is meaningless, we're like, oh, we're worried. Should you go to a doctor? We don't see this as a normal thing. The normal, I think, in most cultures, at least, I think the normal mode of operation, right, is life is meaningful and we are sort of interrelated with one another, right? And not just skin encapsulated egos, right? Bumping into each other and consuming and dying. So I think, yeah, something like that.
I like how you keep mentioning compassion as something that it's kind of like a thread that weaves everything together. But what I don't know if you've I don't well, I just wanted to, because there's a question that kind of touches compassion from the audiences. Like, what would it look like to place compassion at the heart of our ethical, environmental, and even spiritual lives? Is it like a Do you believe that compassion can serve as a meaningful substitute or companion to divine purpose in today's world? I think you kind of touched on it, but maybe you just want to elaborate more about compassion.
Yeah, I mean, I think in I think the stories like cosmovisions and these sorts of things and indigenous traditions and the sort of like way in which a landscape is walking through a landscape is the way that you talk about your cosmology, your origin story, and this sort of thing, or stories that to me is a form of understanding and compassion for the ancestors and the things that came before that allow you to be there, right? It's that you're a part of something larger and you're connected to it. So that if it's being destroyed, yeah, it hurts, right? And I think, just a little sidetrack, the whole rise of ecological anxiety and ecological grief, right? These sorts of things, it's a real problem. I can see it in my students, right? This feeling of dread about the future of the planet. And so that is something that I think comes because we see the suffering of species going extinct. We see the disappearance of landscapes and people's ways of life, and right, and that's suffering, right? And I think the recognition of that is important. Um, so I think also in most religious traditions there are stories and rituals that are about compassion, right? Obviously the crucifixion in Christianity, but also pilgrimages with other people, the fasting during Ramadan, right? That's in part to highlight how how one lives at the expense of other life, right? And the sharing of food with everyone, right? It needs to happen because we all live at the expense of other things. So don't be wasteful. Share things with others. These sorts of things, right? So I think that there are these tools and resources in most religious traditions that sort of promote and foment and encourage compassion, this sort of thing.
Yeah. And speaking of indigenous cultures, or even let's talk about secular tradition. Most secular, I mean, many indigenous culture, secular tradition live with a strong sense of purpose and connection without invoking a deity. And
Mhm.
what can modern environmentalists and philosophers learn from these ways of thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, it's this first of all, this idea. So there's a resurgence in animisms, right? I even have a colleague who's working on Christian animism, right? Taking the idea of the spirit being the breath of life for all living creatures, right? And that's part of the Trinity, right? As a bird, right? So this sort of like animistic tradition of within Christianity, even. So I think there is because of our multiple ecological crises and because of partly because energy and information and people travel so fast around, can travel so fast around the world now that we're coming up, we can see more on a daily basis the horrors of the modern world, right? Whereas that was not as possible just 100 years ago, right? So I think people are beginning to really see that and crave more connection, right? And so including the type of connection that you find in animisms in most indigenous communities. That's sort of one thing that I think can be learned. But another thing is how you translate that into knowledge and science, right? So I think very simply, um, uh, knowledge as in terms of like how we know what we know and how we produce knowledge together. I think the modern sort of Western influenced by China and the Golden Age of Islam and all sorts of other cult in India, all sorts of other colors, what becomes modern science, this reductive productive thing, was very good at making things, right? Medicines and you know these sorts of things. But it didn't it was an extractive form of knowledge production, right? So what can we get out of understanding rather than a connective form, right? I want to I want to know what it means to be fungi or plant or dog or another person, right? I want to know more. I want to know to understand, know to connect, right? So how do we then do this sort of connective knowledge, right? Where it's not just knowledge to get things for some humans to get something out of it.
Mhm.
It's just knowledge for knowledge's sake to create wonder and awe at the rest of the natural world. And there's of course traditions within even these modern Western cultures of romanticism, right? And I think that's sort of the leftover vestiges of the pre-Christian traditions that were there in Europe and these sorts of things. It's is this romanticism, right, that you see pop up every now and then. So yeah.
I think it's very interesting how you mentioned that, what it feels like to be something else. Like sometimes I always imagine that what does it even feel like to be like a microorganism, for instance, like all these invisible creatures that are doing so much for the environment and we can't even see them with our naked eyes and they're just doing their stuff. So it's like, what does it feel like to be water or something?
Right.
I always think about that a lot. Or even like a bird just flying in the sky. Does the bird feel freedom? Because when we see like a bird flying, it's like, oh, that's an idea of freedom. Or maybe the bird doesn't even feel like that. Things like that. It's just
Well, they have
but
the embodiments, right? Birds can
yeah,
hear and see so many things that we can't. They experience a different world.
and yeah,
And you know, there's a philosopher of nature. I'm blanking on his name right now, but he basically does books about birds. His last book was about birds, and if you slow down the bird song, it sounds like it's like a whole symphony going on, but we just hear, you know, but within that, the bird hears something totally different that's melodic and this sort of thing. So, and bird song, the birds hear the nightingales, right? Nightingales go actually to to Africa for the European winter, but they come back every year to the same tree throughout their whole life. They pick one tree. And so they're very territorial like that. But you can tell where the bird has been. Ornithologists, people who study birds, can tell where the bird went for the winter by what songs the bird is singing because the bird picks up songs from the other birds around it. And so then they can go back and see, wow, this is approximately where this bird was, you know. So this whole world, right, or the communication between plants that a lot of people are talking about now and studying, and the ways in which
yeah,
fungi, right, communicate and help
yeah,
us.
mycorrhizae, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So this whole world that we just kind of have up until very recently, well, not everyone, but definitely in the modern sort of Western mindset have just ignored, right? It's like the background, you know.
Yeah, interesting. And speaking of spirituality, do you think environmentalism is becoming a kind of modern spirituality, or maybe green religion, um, spiritual ecology? And is that necessarily a bad thing? Or might it be what we need in a world that is facing collapse, that is, going through the impacts of climate change and environmental degradation and all that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of people who see environmentalism as a spiritual practice. You know, I think obviously I think here especially of someone like Greta Thunberg, right? And her and the way in which she stands up, this, you know, little girl stands up to these big, powerful people in government, right? So, or Wangari Maathai, right? I think that
Yeah, very much. Yeah.
spirituality was definitely like, tree planting, and this is a ritual. It's not just planting trees. So I think there are a lot of people that are turning to some sort of practice that includes addressing connection to, but also trying to help the rest of the natural world. Right? So I don't see it as a threat. I mean, I know that some people do, but I don't see it also. I also don't see a nature spirituality as at odds with whatever religion you're already practicing, right? I mean, they're all
Yeah.
part of the planet, and so, um,
Mm-hmm.
so and they've been pretty good at telling us what we can eat and where and these like and so like if we just modify that to sort of update it to environmental concerns, right? Should we eat this, factory farm chicken, or should, maybe we should eat more plant friendly, or if we're going to eat animals, go hunting ourselves or raise them ourselves or so, so this sort of thing. You know.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of questions about compassion, which we've talked about earlier, but I'm still going to bring us back to it because since a lot of people are interested in that. The question is, compassion is highly underrated and it's sad. The person is asking, but I have noticed that some people don't even understand what it means to be empathetic in the basiest form. That
Mhm.
becomes a problem since you cannot give what you don't have. So how can compassion be taught to those who can't even comprehend it? Is there a manual? Because I really think it should be taught, especially to adults who aren't opportune to be caught young when it comes to empathy.
Right. I don't know. I always go back to this. There's a vegan activist that I used to have come and speak in my classes named Gary Yourofsky. And he used to say, put a rabbit and an apple in front of a baby. And if the baby tries to
Mhm.
eat the rabbit and pet the apple, then I'll give you like $100, right? But there is some sort of innate sense of, oh wow, like, and I think actually children have this when they're born. They have like, a curiosity about life and other animals and these sorts of things. But then a lot of the times in many of our cultures, we're taught to no, you can't be friends with, your best friend can't be a dog, right? Or, don't become friends with the cow because you're going to eat it, or, whatever it is, right? Like, so I think that we're taught like we're human and these things are other animals, and, that gives us the right and the justification to treat them in certain ways that we can't treat humans. But of course, what, as you know, and as everyone here knows, the problem when you have this idea of humans in this special category is then, of course, look at colonization, racism, sexism, who and what counts as a full human, the ideal human, right? And when whole classes of people then are considered more animal, then terrible things can be done to people as well. So instead of right, trying to bring animals into this like divine human realm, why not just make all of it divine and sort of non-hierarchical, and I'm not saying that it's okay you can go and eat a human and this sort of, and that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm not saying that of course we have different priorities and preferences for human, cat, dog, this sort of thing, but what I am saying is that we should think about what types of lives they lead and what types of lives they need, what's the context for which they can thrive, as well, and how can we create our own worlds in ways that don't totally destroy theirs. Um,
Mm. Yeah, compassion, being compassionate. And speaking of emotions, just going back to um many people today, especially young people, are feeling deeply disoriented. The world feels chaotic. We're living through climate crisis, political instability, economic inequality, rapid technological change, very poverty is on the rise every day. The economy is not so great in most part of the world. And at the same time, traditional sources of meaning like organized religions are losing their authority or failing to respond to these global realities. And for someone watching who might be struggling with anxiety, maybe climate anxiety, spiritual disillusionment, or even just a sense of essential burnout, someone who is asking, what's the point? What can I hold on to? What would you say to them about how to find meaning today? Can meaning come from relationships, from service, maybe from storytelling, maybe from the natural world. In what role, if any, do you think spirituality, ritual, or sacred practices can still play in helping us to navigate this uncertainty?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really hard question. I think we all struggle with these anxieties and burnout and these sorts of things. I think it's important to remember that we are bodies, and so we need to find ways to connect our bodies with other bodies, right? So, and I mean, for me, it's I love to go out biking and walking and this sort of thing, but something to ground you, right? So when it's all becoming too much, right, find a practice that helps to ground you and helps to refocus your attention on what's in front of you and what you can do. That's sort of one part of it. And the other part is I think, about the metaphor of the Titanic, right? The ship is sinking, we have choices about what we can do. We can claw, our way to the highest ground so that we're the last ones to suffer from rising waters, or we can play for everyone. We can create the best worlds that we possibly can. We can do environmental hospice for those things that we are going to lose, right? We can mourn together, set up eco memorials, have mourning ceremonies. Like Extinction Rebellion does these die-ins, right? But it's become more of a service and a ritual to help people deal with the grief of the species that we're losing, right? So I think religious traditions and spirituality has a huge role to play in helping us deal with death and chaos and these sorts of things.
Yes. So just wrapping up, I'm going to ask you a reflective or even more a personal question. And you've spoken about viable agnosticism and the mystery that exists in the space between knowing and not knowing. But I would just like to ask directly because I feel like, we're just going around it. So it's very direct is, do you believe in God? Or perhaps maybe a better question is, what does the idea of God mean to you today?
Hmm. It's a good question. I don't have a great answer for it. But to me, I go back to very sort of embodied metaphors, right? Like the breath, right? The breath of
Mhm.
life, right? Something like this. God is the animate energy of the world, that pervades like all things down to the subatomic level. That's what I would say if I like so that I would say, the universe is God's body, or the earth is the earth is could also be part of God's body, and we're part of that, so we're part, these sorts of things, right? Do I believe? I think it's much more like if you've seen starlings fly around and they do all these weird patterns and things like this, right? They're not going from point A, B, C, D all the way to Z, but there is patterns that emerge, and it's beautiful, right? And there may need no ultimate sort of goal that it's trying to get to, but the way that everything interacts together creates beauty, right, in the world. And so I think that if we, impart the goal of a religion or the meaning making practices is to make the worlds that we live in the best, most beautiful, I mean, as we possibly can, right?
So, before we take questions from I'm just gonna do like a closing reflection, which is if you had to finish the sentence for the next generation, life is meaningful because how would you end it?
Um, Life is meaningful because it's the gift of possibilities to do something rather than nothing. Right? Every day we're alive, we have options, right? We're not unlimited, we're not superhuman, but we do have a lot of options, right? And that ability to relate and to help co-create with others, I think, is what makes life meaningful.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bowman. And I'm going to ask that same question to the audience. This kind of ends the podcast session, but we're going to open it up. We have a few minutes just to open up to people. And so if you please feel free to type, whatever you want to come up. It says that life is meaningful because how would you end it? And just looking, I think somebody just, so this is like off the podcast, but the question is, do you believe in God? That should be an easy yes or no. But
Well, no, but I
yeah,
mean, it
you're
depends on
trying you're trying to go around the question. So
depends on
like,
what you mean by God, right? If you mean like a great powerful being in the sky, then no. But if you mean something like something like the life force of energy or that which is at the ground of all existence and all being, then I can get on board with that. I don't believe in the anthropomorphic God, right? I don't believe in the sort of God made in human's image, right? But I think that whatever God is also the ground of the being of a plant or a cat or these sorts of things. So I always wonder if my cats think God is a giant cat or something like that, but who knows? So um
Yes, so somebody said that I don't claim on certainty, but I remain open to the possibility that something greater exists, not necessarily as a divine deity, but as a presence or intelligence that transcends human understanding, one that perhaps reveals itself more through conscience and connection than through doctrine.
mm,
Top said that life is meaningful. Life holds deep meaning through the connections we build, the challenges we overcome, and the purpose we discover along the way. So every moment offers a chance to grow, to love, and to make positive impact. So embracing life fully reminds us that even in hardship, our existence has our value. That's profound.
yeah.
Yeah, very profound. There was one question that I can't say. It's I think it was kind of interesting. Oh yeah. The person was this is a question that says, what if the very fabric of human existence, our morality, our consciousness, our yearning for meaning is not a byproduct of evolution, but a coded echo of a higher being own essence woven into us to both question and reflect its nature. So then, is our search for a purpose truly ours? Or is it the higher being searching for itself through us?
Maybe I missed the gist of the question. Maybe
Yeah, so the question is the search for purpose truly our like how is it truly ours, or is it a divine being searching for itself through us?
I see. Well, I don't know the answer to that, but um but I do think that purpose is sort of emergent in the process, right? I don't think that before the earth formed that the universe was thinking about people, right? I think it emerges in the process, right? And so we go evolution takes all sorts of turns, and we humans, our ability to respond has turned into responsibility, right? We can choose between lots of different options and we can act accordingly, and knowing some of the consequences, this sort of thing, never fully. But so that is something that I think is emergent, right? I wouldn't hold, um, Cro-Magnon man responsible or my cat responsible in the way I would hold like myself responsible, right? Or so I think these things are emergent, right? Where does responsibility come from? It comes out of this long process of humans humaning together and creating, rules and these sorts of things, right? And of course, lots of other animals have rules. Dogs, they have packs and sort of pecking orders and these sorts of things. So it's not that it wasn't in nature before, right? But it emerges into a human form with human beings, right?
Do we have anybody, if anybody wants to come up live to ask question? Somebody did ask that how can they connect with you? If they would like to connect with you, what's the best way? I
Um,
think that
Here
chat box.
I can put my email in here.
So if you'd
Uh,
like to come up, you can just please have a hand raised and we can bring you forward to can take one question, live question from the audience if anyone would like to about the podcast. While we're waiting for that, I just wanted to announce to some of our Green Fellows that we will be having an onboarding meeting that will be communicated later. This particular webinar is for the purpose of this webinar because there have been questions about the fellowship and things like that. That will be communicated via email. Yeah, so if there any is there any questions, please feel free to raise the hands and you'll be promoted to ask a live question. Just trying to see if there are questions that we've
I think
not.
there's someone named Aisha Akhtar who with a hand raised on my screen.
Yeah, yeah, I've tried to promote Aisha, but it's like she's not responding. Don't know if it was a legacy hand or.
Okay.
So Ines, would you like to come up? Okay, Aisha, you have your hand raised. But you're declining to be a panelist. Okay. So I'm just gonna Appy. Would you like to come up live? So please, when you come up, please feel free to.
Sir, am I audible to me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, so my question was from you and the host that what would be the impact of sustainability in the domain of blue economy in the upcoming decade? As I think it would be the next major thing, and it is being underrated right now.
Um, yeah, I don't know a whole lot about economics, but I think this is, of course, very important. I think we need to also develop, of course, a lot of environmental ethics are based upon oftentimes land, right? And how do we have an environmental ethic that is water-based, that's oceanic-based? And there are people, of course, that are working on that. But I like this idea of thinking about an oceanic ethics and an oceanic sort of flow, a way of being, right? Number one, the ocean is not really um, a place where that is necessarily hospitable for human life, right? Without without lots of accoutrement. So it's an again, it's a sign. It says, look, humans are not at the center, right? Um, and so I think the blue economy is going to be very important, but not just in the sense of what we can get from the deep oceans in terms of minerals and these sorts of things, or the meals we can get out of the ocean, but in terms of how we're going to um, treat this resource with all its life as not just a commodity, right? As something that we really can't live without. And some people are going to be dealing with way too much water, and other people are going to be dealing with way too little water, right? So then we've got to figure out what this is going to look like. But yeah, it's a great question. I don't really have an answer. But yes, it's a huge important part of the piece.
I was just asking because what I thought is without exploiting resources, it would be difficult. And as we are being tech advanced and the AI would be leveraging all these things, we would sort of find the ways to extract resources which would compensate and may profit even
Mm,
the things. Here, the problem in 2025 is if we would try to extract resources and minerals, it would be more expensive than what the cost of resources. But
yeah,
maybe in the next decade, there would be certain things, there would be certain processes. But as a human, should we exploit resources? Because we know that what's going to happen. People are people. Human are human. Those qualities, those attributes aren't being changed. What's your perspective on how should they accommodate sustainability in this?
yeah. I mean, I think it's important, and I think we need to come up with a sort of an understanding, right, of the commons, right, the in the ocean. The deep ocean should be the commons for all life, right? There, it shouldn't be exploited for private industry. Now, obviously, there's going to be fishing, there's going to be these sorts of things, but do we need to do deep sea mining if we can find alternatives, right? We're always coming up with alternative technologies and these sorts of things. We need to come up with better batteries, right? Because lithium production is very um, is very nasty, right? But there are. I mean, we need to look at it, I think, and not just sort of what's the next best fix for right now, because that's going to lead to all these problems down the road. But what would be the best for the oceanic community as well, right? Not just the human community, and this sort of thing. I don't know. I don't think I can answer it any more than that. So yeah.
No worries, sir. It's just that I'm getting your perspective, and as an experienced person, whatever you would tell would only benefit. I'm researching on some project related to sustainability inclined with blue economy. And
Hmm.
where I am thinking of that as a person, as a student from a B school, what I can do is I could promote marine sustainability, marine literacy over to a lot of people, as well as market that around and also do some sort of things in which I can't tell you right now because I'm working on that. So I
Yeah.
just wanted your perspective right now. But
Okay,
thanks a
great.
lot, sir.
Thank
And
you.
thanks to the our host to give me that chance. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Okay. So we have we're gonna take, just because we're right on time now, so we're just
Yeah.
gonna take maybe two, and then we'll wrap it up. We have do we have here? We have Nanji Choma. Would you like to start your video and ask your question?
Nope.
Okay. We have Callistos. Would you like to turn on your video if you would like to and then ask your questions directly? Callistos, are
Correct.
you there?
Yes. Can you see me?
Yes.
Yes.
It is dark here in Kenya. It's already 8 in the evening. So thank you so much. You can see me, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, correct. Thank you. Thank you so much, first of all, for the our. It is my first webinar. It has been very insightful, and thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm yearning more and more as the days goes by. I've just have one question that I've posted already, even in the chat. I was thinking maybe you'll read it, but my question goes this way: What gives you, what gives your life a sense of purpose and fulfillment? As we talk about life is meaningful, so what gives you your life a sense of purpose and fulfillment? Number two, in what ways can we create meaning in the lives of others? So those are my two questions. If you can help me understand, I will appreciate. Thank you so much.
Of course, yeah, of course. So I think, I mean, what makes life, there's lots of things that make life meaningful. It's not just one thing, of course. But teaching brings a lot of meaning to my life. I don't have kids, but I teach and I write books and do research because I find that a meaningful way to try to contribute to the next generation, right? To try to do something. I'm not delusional in thinking that I'm going to save the world or anything, but that gives me meaning. I think that's one of the reasons that people go into that profession. There's a lot of horrible things that go along with it, but that's what I do find meaning out of that. I find meaning also out of bike rides. I find meaning watching birds. I find meaning in my pets and other people, right? Connecting with other people. So to me, it's the connecting with in some way. I think that gives me purpose and meaning. Um, and then the second question, how do I look, I don't really know the answer to that either, but I think we should create spaces for um, children and other, I mean, I'm thinking about now, of course, in education and college education. How do we help create a space where students can figure that out for themselves, right? This idea that we now just go to school and try to get, you go to here to get this degree so you can get a job and then get health insurance, like these sorts of things, right? Well, what about like just exploring, right? What spaces do people have to explore, right? To try out, like, let me do a little reading in Buddhism, right? Or whatever, right? To try out an art class or whatever, because I think that flexibility early on in education, which sometimes you don't even see in primary education anymore, is what allows a person to explore what they find meaningful in the world and sort of helps a purpose emerge, right? Um, so to speak. So yeah, that's all I have to say there. Thank you though.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Back to you, Adenike.
Yeah, thank you. Vikram, do you have a question for our guest speaker?
Yes, please. Am I audible?
Yes, you
Yes.
are.
Thank you for the opportunity and for all of your insights. In the interest of time, I'm going to keep this one brief. I've actually written this one down in the question section earlier as well. So I'd like to read that to you verbatim. If life exists without religion, and yet humans still construct systems of morality, pursue transcendence, and seek meaning beyond material existence, does this imply that the human mind is inherently spiritual? Or does this reveal that what we call spirituality is merely an evolved illusion born from the brain's need to reconcile chaos with coherence itself?
Sure. So let's see. A couple of ways to think about this. Yeah, I think meaning making and the desire for meaning is an emergent phenomenon. We see this also in higher primates. Many are talking about this with whale pods and also with elephants and chimpanzees, right? Jane Goodall, for instance, talks about the spirituality of chimpanzees, and they do this sort of waterfall dance and this sort of thing. So I think it is an emergent process. I don't think that because something is emergent and then it has value to our life, that it means that it's an illusion. I mean, we don't see the number one anywhere. we're numbers, right? But we still think numbers are important and they help shape the world around us. We don't see letters anywhere. They don't fall off trees. But they have emerged, right? And so for sure we think language is important, right? So I think of religion as a phenomenon like that, right? Dances, right? I mean, does ballet dance or modern pop dance or all these, what are these, illusions? No, they bring meaning to our lives and they're ways of expressing, the aesthetic beauty of life, right? So I think if we look more at evolution as the um, as sort of the production of beauty, right? Why all these different bird feathers? It's not just about sex, right? It's part of it, but it's not just about the bird song, right? It's not just about food, sex, danger, but that's part of it. But they're also gratuitous, things that emerge that are just beautiful, right? And I think, yeah, to me, that's sort of what religion and meaning making is like that as well. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, we're out of time, but if Dr. Bauman, if you can take two more questions, then that'll be it. I don't know if you have the time to do that. We just have two more people on right now that just came up.
Okay, I can do that. I can do that. Okay, great.
Thank you so much. Nanji Chema, if you would like to unmute yourself and ask you just one question, very brief. Thank you.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So I was one that asked the question on compassion, and why I asked that is, I've encountered people that while you're trying to explain to them that when you treat nature well, nature treats you well. I mean, nature breeds, nature fights, nature does basically everything that we do. But I get this look sometimes from them like, are you serious? Are you for real right now? And those are the categories of people that I was focusing on. It's easier to wow children. I teach too. So I teach kids. It's easier to wow them and let them and catch them young and let them know that um ask them practical questions, putting themselves in the shoes of those animals or those things they try to maybe harass or something. But with adults who were not in that line, those are the kind of people I don't know how to deal with them sometimes. So my question exactly is, how do you deal with them? These people that you try to give them practical example of what it feels like for nature to be hot. How do you deal with them? Those ones that give you this look of absurdity, because where I come from, they make up the majority of the population. If they cannot get the reason why they should not throw debt around or why they should not randomly destroy something in their way, if they cannot get a practical reason, it's hard for them to understand. So how do we deal with those kind of people who can't seem to comprehend it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's on the minds of a lot of activists and different types of activism, right? How do you get someone to care? I don't, of course I don't have an answer to this, but I think part of it is this sort of, I don't know if you know who Loretta Ross is. She's a professor here in the United States in women and gender studies, and she just wrote this book called the calling out and calling in culture, right? So she doesn't like cancel culture, right? Because for her, this is everybody gets canceled. So then if they don't agree 100% with you, right? And that's exactly what the other side is doing to you, which makes you want to call them out, right? So they're the sort of fundamentalist racist or whatever is saying, only this type of person can exist. And then when you cancel everybody, you're saying, oh no, only this type of person can exist. If you don't agree with me, you're canceled, right? So how do you then work with someone and say, listen, this is what you said made me feel this way. I know you to be, brilliant in these other ways. You're a brilliant parent or whatever, like, whatever it is, right? And this doesn't match up, right? And so how can we work with when we come into conflicts? First of all, how do we work with what is common to some sense between us? That's part of it, but then also there are practices, right? People do their ecological footprint, right, to see how many Earths you would need if everybody lived at the same, consumption level as you did, or Joanna Macy's Council of All Beings, where people take on the persona of different animals and ecosystems that are being destroyed by pollutants and climate change and this sort of thing, and you come together in sort of a courtroom and say, this is what you humans are doing to me, this sort of thing. I think that there's not just one way, but I mean, movies, videos, literature, these all help, right? I think it depends on it's usually I think for me it's usually a matter of trying to help students connect with something personal that they have, seen impacted from whatever climate change, sexism, racism, and say like, this is, and then they can make that connection and then move on from there, right? But
So just
I'm not going to try to talk to Donald Trump. I think he's a crazy person that doesn't have empathy for anyone, right? So I don't think it's useful to try to have an argument with someone like that.
I was just gonna add to that from the context of like waste and things and from the environment that you come from is I'm talking to Chioma now, is that sometimes this is not supposed to be, but that's how humans think, is that sometimes you have to incentivize the kind of behavior that you want them to do. So, and I just simple example was like, like in my university, we try to incentivize students for disposing their trash properly or their waste properly. So you bring your plastic, you bring your useful waste to like a green center, and then we'll give you points. So we'll give you some kind of points. And once you accumulate those points, you can exchange that for, an educational material. You can even get money back for your plastic waste or your kind of waste. So by giving incentive, you're changing their behavior without them even knowing it. There's even there's a rural community where I found out that they exchange trash for noodles. Because why noodles? Most people don't need anything, just make the noodles. You don't need to buy anything. And a lot of some people are actually really hungry. So they go around, pick up some plastic and take it to this waste bank, and then they give them like noodles in exchange. I think the company is like their corporate social responsibility. I don't know where they get the noodles from, but I guess the company is sponsoring that project. So that's one way. And when I tell my students about, for instance, riding cycling to school, especially within a university environment, I always tell them that you're doing three things. I'm not telling them, oh, you have to cycle so that you can reduce greenhouse emissions. They don't care about that. I say, when you cycle, you're keeping fit, you're going to look good. Two, you're reducing the amount of emissions in the environment. And three, you're saving costs of, if you have to take like a public transport or something. So that way, it's like, oh, I have something to gain. And, oh, I want to do this because I have something to gain. So you might want to think about how do you incentivize, whatever behavioral change that you want to see in people. With kids, it's easy. But, as you become adults, a lot of people with different problems, with different responsibility, they don't care. They're setting like, this is how it should be. But by the time you put an incentive into it to say that if you're going green, this is what is the need for you. Then there's kind of a mind shift. And also like maybe just take it a step at a time. So if you want to solve like waste problem, you don't go about like, oh, I want to save the world. Just start within maybe your students and say, oh, every morning when we get into classroom, we bin our waste, things like that. And hopefully one of them will change something. And just to give you like just one practical example that is kind of funny with cycling. When I was some time ago, one of my undergraduate students, it was Valentine's Day. And during Valentine's Day, there was this guy that said, oh, I want to give flowers to my girlfriend. I want to write this love note and everything. And this guy jokingly was like, you know what? I can pick up the flowers for you. And I can even, help you do like a nice calligraphy handwriting. And I was like, really? You can? He's like, yeah, just give me, just give me like $200. $200 Nigerian money. And the guy was like, really? That's cheap. Okay, I'll give you $200. I'll give you the money to get the flowers and stuff. And then just gave it to this guy. And this guy took his bicycle and got the flowers, got handwritten, delivered it to this girl, to the girlfriend. And she was so excited. She took pictures. She showed all her friends of, oh my God, it's so romantic and things like that. And other guys, they saw that. And then they went to this guy and said, oh, can you do the same? Can you do the same? And the guy was like, I can actually start a business. So he started a small business. It's called Send Me. It's very simple. Send me whatever you want to do within campus. Send me. So it started this business. He got on bicycle and then delivery. And then from there, he bought another bicycle and then got his friends. And then it feels like, oh, he's making money. And then they go to him. It's like, oh, you can join my business. And then you give me commissions from whatever anybody that calls, you go deliver it. And that was how the guy started a business within the campus community. So incentive is also very important, especially when you're dealing with adults. So thank you. I hope I was able to also add to that. And the last question from Osman, and then we'll hand it, close the session. Yeah, please, Osman, unmute yourself.
Yeah, good evening. Hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Yes, what I want to say is, or what I want to ask is on climate change. I'm from part of the country where, let's say, I'm from the north, and where we have this issue of land degradation, sandals is encroaching, and I find it very difficult to convince people on how to mitigate all these things, how to mitigate the degradation, issue of climate change, you understand, cutting down of trees. You see, if you look at the north right now, or part of the state I am, you see thousands of hectares having like zero trees. You look far, far, as like how you can see far, no trees. So to convince people that these things you are doing is like you're breaking down the ecosystem, the birds that are here are no more, the animals are no more here, even the herders to find grasses to give their animals is very, very hard. So how can we mitigate that? How can you come back and revive those ecosystem? How can we do that? It's very difficult. Yes.
Yeah, how to make
Yes, 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 yes. And you
think
see
that-
people too cutting down trees to make this charcoal for cooking. You understand? So things are happening.
yeah.
Yes.
I mean, how to
Thank you.
make the desert bloom, I'm not sure.
Yes, yes, yes. How to make it green back. Let's make it green. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the technological answer for that. I do know
Okay.
that there are a lot of people doing, working on urban garden, urban agriculture, these sorts of things.
Yeah.
And also, I think tree planting is not a joke. So it's actually quite a radical practice when you think about the economics of what happens through deforestation and who it affects the most.
Yes, yes, yes.
Local communities, children, women, these so
Yeah,
the
yeah.
so I think once you start looking at tree planting as not just planting it, but as a practice like that, then I think that is
Sure, sure, sure.
go some way too, right? And then
Yes.
maybe I don't know, maybe someone else has a better idea.
Yeah,
It's gonna.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think it's always a mixture of technology and sort of human will and meaning, and it's the human side of it has to be there, right? Technology is not going to say
Yes, yes, yes,
and
yes.
this sort of thing, but we need technology. We need the right technology, right? So
Yes, 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 yes.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I do agree with you. It's very simple. It's just start with tree planting. We have one of our
Yes.
fellows, I think he's on this call, Danjuma Samuel. That it was
Okay.
a 2020 fellow last year, and he planted over like 1,000 trees in the north.
Wow.
So yeah, so somebody just have to start. So when you start, some people join. I think it
Sure,
just takes
sure.
to start a
Yes,
movement.
yes, yes, yes.
So
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much.
so thank you so much, Dr. Bauman, for joining us on this and taking time and taking more of your time. But we really do appreciate you being here. And I think your email is in the chat box. So if you would like to connect with our guest speaker today, please feel free to reach out. The recording will be available on the website and probably by next week. And so you should be able to get the recording on YouTube, as well as it's going to be on Spotify. So thank you so much, Dr. Whitney, for
Thank you
joining
so
us.
much.
Yeah, we really
And thank
appreciate
all
it.
of you for your wonderful questions. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And just an announcement, a lot of people are asking from the Green Fellows to say what's next for the fellowship. This is not the official onboarding session. There's still going to be an official onboarding session where we'll take you through, the steps of the fellowship. This is just to, so that you can start joining some of our webinars. We don't want to wait till when the onboarding session will come on. So we have this, and then we have the World Environment Day conference or symposium coming up on June 5th. Please feel free to join that webinar. If you would like to present anything, maybe something, some kind of research or anything that you're working on, please feel free to send that to the email, to the Green Institute email. And if it's good work, then you can also present your paper. Then after the World Environment Day, we will communicate when the onboarding session, and that's where you get all the information that you need to do well in your 2025 fellowship. So this is not the official welcome. This is just, for you to be able to attend some of the events that is going on within the Institute. So thank you so much for everyone for joining, and looking forward to meeting you guys officially in the coming months. And yeah, please feel free to share everything some of the things that we talked about today on your social media platform. Feel free to share that you're now a Green Fellow. Of course, you're not officially until we do the onboarding session. But thank you so much, and I hope that you stay green. And have a lovely day, evening, afternoon, wherever you're joining us from the part of the world. Bye-bye, guys.